I'm Hazem Seeker. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, Apple's tax war with the EU. It could be the world's biggest tax dispute when it hits the courts in 2017, and it will have big implications for multinational companies. India's economy just overtook the UK's in size. We'll look at the growth prospects for 2017 as Prime Minister Narendra Modi tries to stamp out corruption with some bold end-of-year moves. And why is Lamborghini making a sports utility vehicle? We'll ask the CEO about the long-term future of the supercar. So the battle lines have been drawn in a fight which will kick off in earnest next year between technology giant Apple and the European Union's Competition Commission. I remember back in August when Ireland was ordered to collect $13.6 billion in alleged unpaid tax from the iPhone maker. Well, this week, Ireland blasted EU regulators. The government said they are interfering with national sovereignty and attempting to rewrite Irish tax law. Apple also denies any sweetheart tax deals were in place when it opened its base in Cork in Ireland in the 1980s. Both Apple and Ireland are now gearing up for a legal tussle, and the EU's top courts will have to determine who is right. Well, joining us now from Dublin is Jim Clarkin, CEO of Oxfam Ireland. Thanks very much for being with us, Jim. So it looks like this is going to be a major legal battle that it could last for years. But I want to ask you, first of all, what does the EU have to gain from this?
From an Oxfam perspective, it's not so much about what the EU will gain. It's really about the fact that this is an indicative issue that we have been speaking about that is leading to gross global inequality. The UN estimates that $100 billion of tax revenue is lost to developing countries every year. That's money that should be used to pay for essential services of health and education. We're seeing inequality across the world growing, and we see that the lack of investment in these essential services is part of that problem. And the fact that multinational companies are able to avoid paying their fair share of tax in the places that they need to pay it is part of this global problem that we speak about. And this is just one case that is highlighting the extent of what can happen.
And this is something that is going to be fought in the courts, as we said, and for the Irish government, this is an issue of sovereignty for them. They see the European Commission as basically interfering with Irish affairs, Irish tax laws, and it goes back to the familiar complaint of unelected officials in Brussels telling a sovereign government what to do. What do you say to that?
Well, we know that Apple and other multinationals that are operating in Ireland are providing quality jobs and paying taxation on those parts of the work that they do here. But we also estimate that there are $93 billion of excess profits being booked in Ireland every year by various companies and being moved through Ireland. So ultimately, that part of the tax puzzle is one that affects other parts of the world. So that's why getting this global tax system right is essential for citizens everywhere. And this is, as we say, an indication that there are problems in the global tax situation. They've been highlighted in this case, and it's being pursued for those reasons.
How do you even begin to do that, though? Because if you're talking about the need for a more coordinated international approach to close down all of these tax loopholes, where does that start? I mean, we're talking about a very complex system here, aren't we?
Well, ultimately, Oxfam is calling for a global tax body, ideally overseen by the UN, that would look at all these issues. But in the meantime, there are things that can be done. So one of the calls that we have is for public country-by-country reporting of the profits that companies make in the individual countries in which they operate and the kind of taxes they pay there, and that information is publicly available. One of the biggest problems we have in the global tax system currently is the complete lack of transparency. So it's not clear where tax is being paid, where profits are being booked, and where real economic activity is taking place. And that is essential for all countries so that there is a sense of fairness in the tax system, that multinationals are taxed fairly and correctly, and that the citizens in the different places where that revenue should go to benefits from that.
But going back to what the Irish government has said about this, they maintain that their tax code says that non-resident companies like Apple, which is how they see it, shouldn't pay income tax on profits that are not generated in Ireland. And they're saying all that they've done is get Apple to pay the taxes that they are owed in Ireland. And as far as the rest of the profits, that's out of their jurisdiction. How do you respond to that?
Well, they have to be taxed somewhere, I suppose, is the issue. So we need to come to a solution whereby a company like that, where the amount of money that is described that has been forfeited somehow in tax is paid somewhere, and that it is then appropriated to the places that it should be. So this comes back to the fact that the system itself isn't working when a huge problem like that can arise and nobody's clear where the taxation should have been paid, but it hasn't been paid. So that is part of the problem that needs to be solved. Look, we see some progress and we welcome it in relation to the OECD BEPS process, and the EU are trying to make some improvements, but it is very much the surface of what requires being done, and it also, from an Oxfam perspective, doesn't have too much impact on developing countries where so much revenue is being lost, and where we care about, because there is gross inequality and extreme poverty, that the payment of taxes, of the appropriate taxes, would benefit tremendously if that happened.
And since the news of the Panama Papers earlier this year, which revealed a number of companies and individuals who were accused of engaging in tax dodging schemes, have you seen any progress on that front in trying to get people to pay, as you say, their fair share of the tax burden?
Well, I think what the Panama Papers and other leaks have done is they've highlighted the gross extent of this. And ultimately we see that, you know, the ultimate owners of large corporations are shareholders, and shareholders are getting wealthier because the relevant taxes aren't being paid, when the poorer end of society that needs this tax revenue is not getting it to pay for health, education, and for survival in many instances. So look, these exposés across the world are important, but they're only giving us a sense of just how gross the problem is. We need to see a collective approach to now changing that and ensuring that appropriate taxes are paid in the places that they need to be paid, and that the citizens benefit as they should, and that the multinational companies themselves have clarity on where and how much tax they should be paying, so that there's a system that everybody can see quite transparently and that works for everybody, and that we don't have that today.
Do you think Ireland will ever see this more than $13.5 billion?
It's very hard to say where that money will eventually end up. I suppose from an Oxfam perspective, we would be concerned that elements of it may well have been due in poorer countries where it should be paying for tax. The $100 billion that's lost in revenue to developing countries every year, as estimated by the UN, we know would put all of the 122 million children that are currently not in school today in school. It could save 5 million children's lives every year, and it could benefit generations of people. So there is a real global problem here. This is an indicator of it, but it just shows how much work needs to be done in order for this to be resolved, so that everybody benefits.
Jim Clark, and thanks very much for talking to us on Counting the Cost.
Thank you.
Well, Apple isn't the only company in the EU sights. This week, antitrust chief Margaret Vestager filed charges against social media giant Facebook. It's accused of misleading the EU during its 2014 takeover of WhatsApp. She said the company at the time did not reveal plans to connect people's Facebook accounts with those on the messaging app. They could face a fine of about $200 million. Now, the executive board of the International Monetary Fund says Christine Lagarde will stay as its leader despite her conviction for negligence in a French court. Natasha Butler reports from Paris.
Christine Lagarde had been in court throughout the trial, but she was absent for the verdict, having left Paris for Washington. Lagarde was found guilty of negligence for failing to challenge a state arbitration payout of over $400 million to French businessman Bernard Tapie in 2008 when she was France's finance minister. But despite the conviction, the court didn't punish her. a decision her lawyers called confusing.
There is no sentence, there's no penalty, there's no fine. There's the result of this last 5 years is nothing, which leaves us in kind of a complicated or strange, again, situation. We have an unusual court with an unusual hearing with no accusation and no sentence.
The judge said that Christine Lagarde's personality and international reputation had played in her favour, and also that Lagarde had been dealing with a global financial crisis at the time. During the trial, the IMF chief had maintained her innocence and said she acted in good faith to end a legal dispute which had dragged on for years. A lawyer by training, she had chosen to defend herself alongside her team.
She was present at all times during the trial last week. She wanted to participate, to answer all of the questions.
At the end of the trial, Lagarde had said the suspicion that hung over her the past years had caused her great anguish.
All right, still to come on Counting the Cost. Meet a young fashion designer who is breaking down barriers for people with Down syndrome. But first, there's a bit of a buzz about India going into the new year. Its economy has sped ahead of the United Kingdom's for the first time in over a century. And it's all because of the slump in the value of British sterling versus the US dollar. But while global rankings are looking up for India, on the ground, its people are suffering following last month's surprise decision to ban the most common currency bills. That clampdown on cash is taking place in an all-cash economy. Well, joining us now from Glasgow, Scotland, is Gregor Irwin. He is the chief economist at Global Counsel. Thanks for being with us. Good to speak with you again. So what do you think is happening here? And first off, is India actually overtaking the UK as the 5th largest economy in the world?
In all probability, yes. I don't think we should be terribly surprised by that. I don't think it's because of Brexit. I don't think it's because the UK economy is slowing. It is partly because sterling has fallen in value as a result of the Brexit vote, but most importantly, it's because the Indian economy is growing so fast.
Interesting that you say that, though, because looking ahead to 2017, what do you see as the growth outlook for India overall, given everything that is happening right now with monetization, the demonetization program, getting rid of the large currency notes, and the problems that's causing for many people in India right now?
Well, I was in India at the time that the demonetization was announced, and you could see that it was a complete surprise to all Indians. It's a very bold move. Its intention is to reduce the size of the black economy, to encourage people to use the banking system. That'll be good for tax revenues. It'll be good for the long-run growth of the Indian economy. But it is a short-run shock to growth in India. A number of businesses are really dependent on cash, and it looks as though some of those businesses are struggling. So it may well be that in 2017 growth is a little bit lower than it might otherwise have been, but this is certainly an investment in stronger growth in future by the Indian government.
Is it really working, though? Is he really stamping out corruption by doing this?
Well, I don't think any one measure in isolation can stamp out corruption, but what it certainly does is provide a strong incentive for people to put their money through the banking system. My guess is that people will be much more hesitant to hold cash in future for fear that this could happen again. The government will not want to do it again, that's for sure, as well. But the proof will be just how much money ends up going through the banking system, and by the end of 2017 certainly we'll have a very good idea about how the policy is working and just what sort of short-run impact it is having on demand in the Indian economy.
Well, looking at Britain then, you said earlier that Brexit is having a negative effect on the UK economy, particularly the weaker currency. What milestones should we be looking out for then in 2017 for the UK? What do you think is the economic story for the UK in 2017?
Well, 2017 will be the year that the Brexit negotiations start properly. Theresa May, the Prime Minister, will launch the process in March, and those negotiations will take about 18 months. So that will be when I think people begin to see just what the real impact of Brexit will be on the economy, what impact it will have on trade relationships with the rest of Europe, and potentially what impact it has sooner than that on investment behaviour in the UK. So while we haven't seen any impact of Brexit on growth rates in the UK so far, no significant impact, I think we may well begin to see that impact in 2017.
So if we look then at what this means for bilateral trade between the two countries, is the UK looking to forge closer ties with India post-Brexit? What do you think is happening there?
The UK government certainly is. When I was in India at the time of the demonetisation, the Prime Minister Theresa May was also in India along with Trade Secretary Liam Fox, and their objective, quite simply, was to try and lay the groundwork for a trade deal with India after the UK leaves the EU. Now, actually, as it turned out, I think Theresa May had a bit of a shock in India, because when Britain goes to a country like India and says, we want free trade, a country like India says, great, let's do it, but if we're going to have free trade, we need to have access for our business people to the UK market. That means getting easier access to visas. It also means allowing Indian companies to transfer workers into the UK, and that just looks very difficult politically from a UK perspective. So I would say we're not going to see a UK-India FTA anytime soon, and instead the UK government and the Indian government will need to focus on trying to reduce what are called trade irritants, smaller issues that get in the way of free trade, but which can be addressed outside of the context of an all-encompassing free trade agreement.
And obviously India is a much bigger country and has had very large growth rates over the last few years than Britain, so this was perhaps inevitable. But do you see any irony in the fact that Britain is being overtaken by its former colonial subject?
To be honest, I don't see any irony in that. This is a sort of state of affairs that we should expect to happen. India is a huge country. It is growing fast. That's good news for the Indian economy. It's good news for the global economy. It's good news for the British economy, because Britain wants to trade with a country like India. So I think it will be largely welcomed by the UK government, and it makes India a more attractive trade partner.
Gregor Irwin, thanks for being with us.
You're very welcome.
Well, we've been watching the car industry with interest here on Counting the Cost in 2016. We've talked about driverless cars and innovation when it comes to the connected car. And it's going to be a big talking point again as we head into 2017. This week, I caught up with Stefano Domenicali, the new CEO of Lamborghini at the company's headquarters in Sant'Agata Bolognese in Italy. I asked him about plans for making a high-tech sports utility vehicle.
We don't have to forget that in 1986, the first, I would say, SUV was the LM002. And if you look back in the history, that gives you the perspective of what was the thinking already in that time in Lamborghini. Now I think the market is mature enough to have this kind of product. As you know, the SUV represents by far the biggest market on which all the manufacturers are getting in. This makes our challenge even more difficult, but more exciting, because we know that we're gonna, let's say, be in a place where all the biggest manufacturers, as I said, will be. But we are confident that the choice of this car is totally coherent with the Lamborghini values. For sure, it will be an SUV with a very impressive characteristic in terms of design. In terms of DNA of the car, it will be a real Lamborghini to drive. And I do believe that we have the potential to enlarge our customer base with as I said, with the currency of the value that we want to transmit to our customer. And we are looking forward to present this car, because we do believe we have something special that the market will appreciate. With regard to the actual portfolio that is mainly based with the Huracan and the Aventador models, we need to be stable around the 3,500 cars. This is the number that we want to keep as a stable number. For sure, when we're gonna be in the market with the new SUV that is the Urus, then that is the dimension on which we need to make sure that if the demand is there, we're gonna be ready with our capacity with regard to the production. In the next 3 years, we do not to underestimate the fact that we will be around 7,000 cars globally. That means that the dimension of our company will grow incredibly. And if you just think what was Lamborghini just 5 or even 10 years ago, that gives you the perspective of what Lamborghini is doing and what Lamborghini is living so far. It's an incredible challenge to make sure that we stabilize our profile, we stabilize the brand perception around the world, we stabilize our capacity. We need to make sure that, here in Sant'Agata Bolognese, together with our shareholder, we do the right step.
Stefano Domenicali there. And a couple of interesting facts about Lamborghini that many of you may not know. The company was originally founded as a tractor manufacturer before switching to high-end sports cars. And while it is never a good idea to speed, it is an especially bad idea in Italy because Lamborghini also make custom-built cars for the Italian state police. They go 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, so they will catch you. Staying in Italy, the cabinet has approved a controversial state bailout for the country's third biggest bank, Monte dei Paschi di Siena. The money will come from a $17 billion rescue fund passed by the Italian parliament. One of the big worries here is the taxpayer bailout will put more pressure on the economy, and the bondholders, who are ordinary Italians, will also have suffered losses under new EU rules. Germany's Deutsche Bank was also in focus as the year draws to a close. It struck a tentative deal with the U.S. Department of Justice after months of negotiations. It has agreed to pay $7.2 billion in penalties to settle a case into its selling of mortgage-backed securities. Now, these are the toxic banking products that led directly to the 2008 financial crisis. That's far below the enormous $14 billion initially demanded. But that settlement is not final, so let's watch this space. An uplifting story to end this week's show from Guatemala. A young fashion designer with Down syndrome is encouraging people to look at the disability in a new way. Here's David Mercer from Guatemala City.
Isabella Springmull has always had a flair for fashion, but when she applied to design schools in her native Guatemala, she was rejected. Having Down syndrome was considered too great a problem. But rather than give up on her dreams, the 19-year-old was motivated to push harder.
I gave it all my effort. I worked hard. I was so determined. And I put in so much hard work in order to overcome all the obstacles in front of me.
Isabella learned to sketch and to sew, and her persistence paid off. In 2015, she was invited to participate in London Fashion Week. She's the first designer with Down syndrome ever to do so.
It was the most incredible, beautiful experience. At first I had doubts and was afraid that this obstacle was too much, but no.
Isabella, together with her mom and 2 seamstresses, are now expanding their line of clothing and bags in preparation for more international fashion shows in 2017.
But had Isabella been born to another family, her life could have been far different. For many Guatemalans, being born with special needs is a virtual prison sentence.
Guatemala's only psychiatric hospital offers a glimpse into how people with special needs can be forced to live. Some people with Down syndrome are simply locked away, considered an embarrassment to their family. Isabella's mother admits that few parents are prepared for a child with Down syndrome. But through education and therapy, she's convinced that all children with the condition have more potential than most people can imagine.
In order to give them hope, they need a guide, someone to tell them they can do things, someone to tell them they're capable, and to help them in difficult times.
Isabella might look like a girl with Down syndrome to those around her. But when she looks in the mirror, what Isabella says she sees is an international designer.
Great story to end on there. So that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. You can also get in touch with us by tweeting me at Hazim Sika, and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. So that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Hazim Sika from the whole team here. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.